I don't want anyone to think that, I hated the experience completely. I have some beautiful memories, from that church, and my grandmother teaching some of my Sunday school classes. Like, I'll never forget that. And they didn't teach, heresy. There were a few points of,
We did.
yeah, it wasn't that deep.
Yeah.
There were some heretical things that were taught, but
Right.
On the whole, it was pretty biblical. They taught biblical stories, and did it well. And we had church camp. It was called Camp Utopia.
Oh, wow.
In Springville, Alabama. Yeah, Camp Utopia in Springville, Alabama. So anyone who's ever been to that, shout out. It was fun, man. We did rallies and races, and every night we'd do the chapel services, and the music was bumping. And but there were so many people in the building that I didn't have to do all the moves and stuff because there were so many kids. So I was able to kind of hide but still enjoy it and be there. So that was good. But there was one experience, which I know in Pentecostal faiths, I don't know about UPC, but we've kind of talked about this. Did people fall out in the spirit?
Yeah, we had a lot of falling out. We didn't. So I want to be careful with some of the people coming on here. When we would fall out, it was not a focus. We didn't focus on people falling. There are a lot of charismatics who do the whole they'll blow on you and try to make you fall, or they'll throw a blanket on you and you'll fall out. We didn't do that. I would say it was more rare. Sometimes someone would lay a hand on you and someone would just fall, and that it didn't happen. It happened often enough to where I wouldn't think it was weird. Okay. But it wasn't something that we hyper focused on. That we would do people would get drunk in the spirit. I don't know if y'all had that, or people would be laid out, slain in the spirit, and they would just be speaking in tongues for hours, and then they start laughing, and they just laugh for hours, and we'd leave them in the chapel because they were drunk in the spirit. Yeah.
Okay. That's a first.
Yeah.
For me, no, there was falling out in the spirit, whatever you want to call it. That was very regular in our church, and sometimes and I don't want to offend anyone who may still be in that type of denomination or faith. It was just, for me, very strange, because we had the pastor who would wave his jacket one good sweep across the auditorium, and people would hit the ground. Yeah. And as being used to that, even as a kid, still I was like, what just happened? Because I never heard a sermon or anything from Scripture that that happened in the Bible. And I remembered, I have a very narrative mind. I remember things in the Bible as stories. And I just never, a story never came to me in my head. Where when did Paul ever do that? Or Peter or any of those guys? And it just didn't. I didn't see it in the Bible. But people were doing it, and people who seemed genuine, very kind people, who I loved and respected, who taught me in Sunday school class, all of a sudden they just hit the ground. They put the purple sheet over their face, and they're out cold on the ground. And so at church Camp Utopia, it was one of the services going on. The music was bumping and going, and the dude came up and put his hand on my head. I was completely aware of nothing's really happening in my mind or spiritually happening, but I fell out. I fell over, and with some of the people who do it, when they would fall out, they would have guys catch them because they would fall pretty intensely. When he touched my head, I kind of through my peripherals looked and see if anyone was there, and noticed no one was, so I carefully fell and guided myself down. So yeah, it was a total fake fall, but I did it safely, and I fell back, and I remember laying there with the music still going, just basically just nothing happening, and taking a nap, and that's nuts. But at the same time, I do remember someone put my head in their lap and was rubbing my head, but I felt comfortable, felt safe, and I finally opened my eyes, and it was my cousin Corey, who had my head in their lap, and she was crying and just happy that I was in that moment. And even though it wasn't, authentic, that was a beautiful memory,
Yeah. I mean, I have memories, I've never fallen out, but here's the thing for me, I don't doubt that sometimes it's real. The fact that we never focused on it. I remember when my dad, we when we split from the oneness, we were still very Pentecostal in like the way our services would go. We just weren't. We were teaching the full gospel, and he was teaching a biblical, very, very biblical now, and we had left behind all of the stuff. But I remember there were times we never focused on it. I remember 2 times in 7 years that he pastored that church, 2 times that people fell out. And so for me, and it both times shocked us because he wasn't coming up laying hands asking, like, he was just coming to pray for them. And that was something that Pentecostals we do. We lay hands on your forehead and pray for you. And that's all he was doing. He was just praying for you. And this lady, he did it, and as soon as he touched her head, she hit the ground so hard. And it shocked him and all of us. And so there was, to me, my experience was scarce enough with that it felt very real to me when I saw people having that. And I think that there is, and I'm trying to think, there is some scriptural basis for people falling out, but I don't have it on the top of my head, and I'm going to get myself into trouble if I start claiming it.
What's the song on my prostrate fall?
On
my prostrate fall.
Okay, I don't know.
It's like a hymn or something, and I'm pretty sure like that came from the Psalms. It's somewhere in the Psalms where like it was a falling out in a sense of like just like complete surrender and complete like, or even being overcome with emotion and just like falling out or your knees going weak. That can be authentic.
Yeah, that's what I've heard, and I've heard people talking about. It's an experience of being unable to stand in the presence of God. It's just like I'm in His presence and I can't stand. And that's what it is
For sure.
And so I imagine that it's very real. I've never experienced it. I've experienced a lot of things, but I have not experienced that. It wasn't very common, and so I also wouldn't have had a reason to fake it because it wasn't normative. There were some things that like, I understand that like we would have altar calls would be so intense sometimes that if the preacher had preached one of those, we called it either a shouting message or a crying message. Like he'd preach, it's either shouting or crying. That's what us kids called it, shouting or crying message. If he preached a crying message, then we all knew we had to go to the altars, and we all knew we had to lay and bury our heads and our elbows. Mm-hmm. So I'd be up there at the altar, and there was this waiting game of peeking your eyes up to see is your buddy still there, and who's going to stay there longer. It's like, I'm not praying. Mm-hmm. I'm taking up a spot in the altar because I feel like if I go back first, I'm the carnal one. Mm-hmm. I'm the carnal youth, and it's a very prideful thing. I wanted to be the spiritual one of the youth group. So I'm sitting up there for 30, 40 minutes sometimes, not praying, just waiting to see if I can outlast my buddies. And so I understand, like, there are some things that are normative in that world that it's just, you feel like you're supposed to do it.
Yeah.